Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Nanke? Absent. Member McCoy?
Here.
Member Osick? Absent. Member Hoy? Absent. Member Cook? Absent. Member Lewis?
Here.
Member Nordike? Absent. Member Tigan?
Here.
Member Mingo?
Here.
Member Moore Green? Absent. Member Bassett?
Here.
Member Judy? Absent. Member Hazlitt? Absent. Member Bergman? Absent. Member Milton? Absent. And we do not have a quorum.
Say anything you want.
Okay, so city manager has some statement he wants to make.
Some brief comments. The first being thank you for taking time out of your day to be here at noontime to learn about priority-based budgeting. Priority-based budgeting is a tool that will help continue the city's effort to align resources with community needs and issues that were identified in the strategic plan and that were selected by City Council through the priority agenda. Priority-based budgeting is a tool that we're very grateful the Budget Committee chose to fund, and I'm very excited to share with you Resource X's resources, to have you have this opportunity to hear from Chris Fabian on what priority-based budgeting can do for Salem. He just left a group of about 100 of our mid-managers, division managers, department heads, and budget analysts, and he wasn't booed out of the room. There were a few skeptical faces. We do have some experienced managers who've been through budget changes before, budget exercises before, and I wanted to share with the Budget Committee that this is not a one and done. This is another tool in our toolbox, and Chris will talk more about how this is not an end. This is part of our journey to continue to align resources with those needs that are selected by City Council. So again, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Chris, I believe, or Casey.
Okay.
Chris.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is this working well for the recording? Okay, great. My name is Chris Fabian, and this is my team, Steve Seaman and Santina, who will be helping you throughout your implementation. So I'm really pleased to be here. I know we have a tight timeline, 1 o'clock, we must be out here, and I do want to make sure that there's time for you to ask some questions, and please do so along the way. As Steve just mentioned, we just got out of the presentation to the departments, and that went really well. And today, the entire theme is launching your process. I say that today is about launching your process. One thing that is unique about the City of Salem is that you've been building up towards this, and I'll explain that a little bit further in the presentation. You're not starting from scratch, which is wonderful. Some of the work that your team has already been doing over the years. My first introduction to the City of Salem was back actually in 2007, 2008, when we were first creating priority-based budgeting for our own local government, and they were in touch with us from the beginning. So the identification of programs and services, costing of those programs is not new to the organization overall, but we're here to help kind of take it to the next level, and that's really what I want to spend the time this morning with you, or this afternoon, talking you through how this is going to look. So the agenda, I have 3 basic points to work our way through today. First off, I really want to spend the most of the time that we have together talking to you about what other communities have been doing with their priority-based budgeting data. So that gives you a look towards the future of what some of the applications could be, and really just to get your creativity going in terms of how this actually is different from other budget processes you've been through before. I'm going to talk a little bit about the steps, and then, of course, the rest of the day and how we get kicked off. But I thought where I'd begin, this is our blueprint for how priority-based budgeting gets used, and really why you're doing this. What is this supposed to be? And I really hope that you start to think about the budget in a different way than maybe what you've been thinking about before. Priority-based budgeting, as Steve just mentioned, it's a tool. It's a tool of many different tools that you will now have as the budget committee, as elected officials, as leaders of this organization, trying to create a better future with the resources that you have. You see over on the left-hand side, there's that box that says, we have new needs. So for most of the organizations, when we get started, we start with this overall premise that as you look out towards your future, you probably can envision new services that you're hoping to start that are going to make this community outstanding. Or you have services that you provide today that might need more money. The pressure of things like PERS is an example of things that you do today where the costs go up. So whether it's pension liability or infrastructure, costs go up, and yet not all the time do we have the resources to be able to fund that. Now you see there's a little subset down towards the bottom that says we have no new needs. We do have some communities who truly believe it's hard enough just to preserve what you're doing today, and they don't want to talk about any new needs towards the future. It's already difficult to just sustain the services without degrading. We hear the comments from some of our communities who say the challenge for so long has been to do more with less, and some local governments are frankly just doing less with less. And that is, while not very aspirational or inspiring, that is the situation that they're in. So, but we're up towards the top where you're imagining a future that you're trying to create. Hi, thanks for joining. Where you're trying to think towards the future and the new programs that you're hoping to get into. And not with abundant, infinite resources. And so basically, priority-based budgeting is here to help set up the two basic levers that you have at your control. One is the revenue side, the other is the expense side. How are we going to figure this out? And throughout all of our work together, all we're going to do is organize your data, the services you provide, how much they cost, in order to help you understand better these two basic levers. On the cost side, we're really talking about how you might be able to free up the resources that you already have, how to optimize the resources that are already given to the city, and perhaps reallocate those resources. So that's what we focus on. And the options and opportunities that we're going to frame for you around every program that you provide include things like sourcing. That becomes really intriguing, and I'll show some examples towards the end of my presentation this morning. More and more of our communities are looking towards other potential partner program providers, whether that's through the public sector, nonprofit, or even the private sector, where the goal is back to freeing up and reallocating resources. If you can find a partner who can either help you provide a service or take it off of your plate, the idea is that you free up your own internal resources, your human resources, your financial resources, in order to push them back to the beginning of the blueprint towards those new programs that you want to get into, for which you don't have the money to fund today. So very practical. That will be the context of the sourcing discussion. Or if it comes to program efficiencies, as another example, while a good goal of focusing on program efficiency is to just be good stewards of the taxpayer resources, in this context of priority-based budgeting, the idea is wherever we can apply technology, reorganize our human resources to provide a program with less resources, which is the definition of efficiency, how can we take those saved, freed up resources and start new programs or enhance current things? So it's all a means to an end. Or finally, on the service level front, you will come across programs that you provide today where the realization is we can simply do less, and that might be appropriate. It's always hard to think about what those programs are, however, because everything that you provide is important to somebody, but there will be certain programs that we put into that particular context to say they have less to do with the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Might we be better served if we do less of those services, again, in order to reallocate the resources that we have? So there will be an optimization side of the equation. Now, of course, we will get to the revenue side too. It's not just on the expense side. Remember, we have two basic levers. So on the revenue side, every program that you provide will have a cost equivalent. So your entire budget is now translated around the cost of providing each and every service. And for those where a user fee does come in, whether that's a grant, a program revenue, someone's paying for the benefit of that service, you will at least have, as policymakers, the opportunity to evaluate, is it appropriate to increase fees to cover the cost of providing that program? It's a policy discussion. Again, PBB is just meant as a tool to put the data in front of you so you can see what those options are. Grant funding, I use the term generally and broadly. Not only are we talking about are you recovering the cost from the federal government or the state government wherever you can, which is something that PBB communities do when you have resources coming in. But you're also looking at, are there other entities, other agencies who would pay you for the benefit of a service? For instance, if you determine through priority-based budgeting that you're well-positioned to provide fleet services, as an example, to other entities besides your own, it might be the case that you can charge for that service, provide it regionally, and bring in additional revenue into the equation. Finally, we look at taxes and rates for services, and you'll notice up there it says last resort. Ultimately, all priority-based budgeting communities can take on the taxation discussion. It's just not first on the table. It's not the first option that we're pointing you to. The point of priority-based budgeting is to do your due diligence and walk through every other possible opportunity before you reach out to the citizens and say, might it be time to think about new revenues into the equation? We've had many PBB communities very successfully ask for and have approved requests for new taxes overall. So as elected officials, I want you to know one of our major advisors from early on in the creation of priority-based budgeting, she's a former elected official and a former mayor. Her name is Kathy Novak, and she was past president of the National League of Cities. Her point about your seat in general is that you have your basic tools, and they're good. You have your line item budget. As one example, you have the program budget that Kelly and Casey have been working on for quite some time, and you already prioritize. But the point is, how can we take that line item budget and provide additional intelligence on it for you to be able to make the informed policy decisions that you wish to make? How are those resources aligned with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve? If you increase the line item for supplies and services, or if a department asks you for an additional FTE, how can you characterize that FTE in terms of the services that you're trying to provide and the relationship of those services to the results that you're trying to achieve? So it will truly feel like a migration from line item thinking to the alignment of resources with results. At this time, we are now implementing in just about 200 communities across the United States and into Canada. Here in Oregon, City of Tualatin and the City of Springfield are current implementers. Across the United States, cities more of your caliber include the City of Kansas City, Missouri, actually the City of Kansas City, Kansas, the unified government of Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas as well, Columbia, South Carolina, another capital city, San Jose, California. The City of Denver is launching its first foray into PBB with one large department, Edmonton, Alberta, Cincinnati, Ohio, Toledo, South Bend, Indiana. There are a whole host of cities more of your caliber who you will be able to relate to, and we share the data as well. That becomes an opportunity area. Now, just out of interest, we also have some very small communities. Victor, Colorado has a population of 300 people. They've gone through priority-based budgeting. They have a staff group of 5. But if you imagine with only 5 FTE and all the services that they need to provide to their community, it becomes all the more important to prioritize those scarce resources. You amplify that to a city of your size, and it's the exact same approach. How are those resources aligned with services? How are those services aligned with results? We had our first school district, which is very interesting to us, Washoe County Schools in the Reno, Nevada area. Why is that interesting to you all, your city government? Is because as our communities start to look for partnership opportunities overall, you might be surprised at the types of things that take place in a school district that are actually similar to the things that the city does. We take it for granted sometimes that the city's in the business of providing services to citizens around safety, economic vitality, infrastructure, utilities, and so on, and the schools are about education. But when you get down to that program level, you both do fleet, you both take care of grounds and parks and facilities overall. There will be a whole host of opportunities that we're going to try to get down to and explore overall in your exercise. So I thought I would spend the rest of the morning talking about these 4 levels as a way to give you some insight into your own future. And I want you to think about it this way. I'm trying to capture the reasons and the motivations that people get into priority-based budgeting, realizing that they evolve over time. You will start to get skilled at this mindset and philosophy around resource reallocation, and then interesting things start to happen, and you begin to graduate. But I'll work my way up the ladder, starting with number one here being a rational tool to stabilize the budget. And what I mean by that is we are looking at a way to transition the use of the line item budget in context that becomes more serving to you as elected officials overall. And let me just show you what that looks like. This is Boise, Idaho. And like you, if you look on that left-hand side, I do not intend for you to try to read this, especially the small text. So if you're wondering that, it's just illustrative of a point that I'll get to here in a second. But if you look over here on the left-hand side, these might seem familiar to you. Every PBB community identifies what we call results. They are the reason for your existence. Why do you collect a single dollar? Why do you spend it? It's to make your community safer, to create a responsible built environment, perhaps. These are the results that are important to Boise citizens. Environmentally sustainable community, a creative and informed community, healthy people, a connected community, and a strong, diverse local economy. And internally, they have a result that describes the way that they provide those services, the how, innovative and high-performing organization. And for each of these results, they have specific definitions that describe how do we create a safe and secure community. Is it about crime reduction? Is it about property protection or environmental safety, and so on? And the question for Boise elected officials is that while they have become really good at identifying their results and definitions, they wonder, well, how does the budget either contribute to the achievement of these results? And that's the $650 million question, right? So what they've done in their implementation is that they can measure every dollar to every service that they provide. Those services are evaluated relative to their influence on each and every one of the results they're trying to accomplish. And so from your seat, you can see how much of your budget goes to the achievement of any particular result. So here in Boise, safe and secure community receives the greatest contribution. They're investing the majority of their budget resources towards the improvement of safety and security for their citizens, followed by strong and diverse local economy, healthy community, and so on and so forth. How elected officials and budget committees such as yourselves engage with this type of data is to ask yourselves, you're the ones who have a pulse on the community, and again, back to that blueprint, you're looking out towards the future. Where do you need more work? What does the city of Salem need? Or if you're in the city of Boise here, is safety an issue? How are we doing there? Is the economy where we need to be putting more of our resources? So it really starts that conversation around the future that you're trying to develop. Now, what's really cool about the work that you've done, obviously, these are conversations that are not new to you around creating a safe community, strong and diverse economy, safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure. These come from your documents. The question at the end of our work will be, where do you stand? And so this alignment overall of resources with results will be one of the primary outcomes of all of your work. Scott County, Minnesota, has gone so far to relabel their entire budget process delivering what matters. And I like it for its simplicity. In the end, that's all the budget is. We're trying to understand, are we delivering what matters with the resources that we have? And I mentioned Scott County because they've been able to use their priority-based budgeting work in conversations with Standard & Poor's and with Moody's to justify a higher bond rating, so they're AAA rated. Why is this the case? I don't come from the finance and accounting world overall. I'm actually an engineer. But if you go back to the Great Recession when we were putting priority-based budgeting together, agencies like Standard & Poor's and Moody's were under a lot of pressure. And they were under a lot of pressure because every single local government was having to cut back in some way, shape, or form. And so the pressure on these agencies was, what is the criteria that we're going to use to demonstrate if anybody's really healthy or not? And as they looked towards communities for how they were surviving the Great Recession, many of us resorted to things like across-the-board budget cuts because we didn't have another option. I mean, we have to balance the budget in some way, shape, or form. And they took a hard look at some of these agencies and they said, anybody can balance the budget by doing an across-the-board cut. What's really hard to understand is what are the consequences of those decisions. And through priority-based budgeting, you will be able to tell from every line item that is impacted. If you're going to increase funds for toner in the copy machine, those line items are connected to programs. What programs use toner in the copy machine? And those programs are connected to results. So it takes a line item discussion, and you can understand the impact of those line item decisions on the results, ultimately, that you're responsible for trying to achieve. So that's how they've been doing it. Well, if that's a level 1 motivation, we want some way to understand, for all that goes into the budget, what are we getting by way of results and outputs. We wondered, once everybody stabilizes the budget, would anybody need to do priority-based budgeting anymore? The budgets are stable. Why not go back to the old way of doing business? And we're kind of delighted to see, even post-Great Recession, there is just as much of a need to prioritize when you're not in a budget-cutting situation, because when it comes down to it, you still have far more needs that you're likely trying to accomplish than you have the money to take on. So you have to prioritize your scope, what you're really going to try to go after. So level 2 communities, even beyond achieving a stable budget, continue to use PBB to make sure that any new program that they're starting is a high priority new program, or any budget enhancement, a program that they're growing, is of a high priority as well. And what you're seeing here in Boulder is an example of this, and I want to describe this for you real quick. It's one of the key visualizations of priority-based budgeting, just like spending towards results. Every dollar is associated with a program. Programs are evaluated relative to the results that they achieve. There's a scoring criteria that everybody goes through. The programs that have the greatest degree of influence on your results end up being what you call quartile 1 programs. They simply have the greatest influence on what you're trying to achieve. As differentiated from quartile 2 programs, which also are highly influential, just not as influential as quartile 1, as differentiated from quartile 3 and ultimately quartile 4, where it is not as if here in quartile 4, these are irrelevant programs or worthless programs. Everything that you do, you offer today because it matters to somebody overall. It's just a framework to say, if given the opportunity to scrutinize where resources are being invested, wouldn't we want to put some of our focus at least on programs that have less impact on our citizens, on the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish? And what you see here in Boulder, this is a time lapse. So here in green, here in blue is where they started, and in green is where they have made changes. So you can see the vast majority of their increases in the budget have come at quartile 1 and quartile 2 level. So those are new programs that they need to start, and they're making sure that those resources are invested where they're going to have the greatest degree of impact. They've grown quartile 3. That's okay. What they've said is, if we're going to grow a quartile 3 program that has less to do with impacting results, these programs should pay for themselves. So these are citizens who pay rates and fees who are willing to invest in that program and grow it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a great policy discussion to have. And then finally here in quartile 4, notice that not only have they been able to keep those programs flat, but they've begun to systematically mine away resources. This includes taking people off of some of these programs and reallocating them to be invested in programs that are going to have a higher degree of impact. These are service level reductions. These are program efficiencies. These are program partnerships. Everything we talked about on the blueprint. That's how they're able to start to mine away some of those resources overall. And resource reallocation truly becomes to be something important. At the higher level, you see a community like Boulder focusing on all of the programs that they offer. You can drill down into your data to see each individual person, each employee. So here's Chandler, Arizona. Here's a city communication coordinator. This is 1 FTE. And by virtue of the way that program costing takes place, we know every program that this person contributes to and the relevance of those programs, so that we can look at this individual's time and say a great deal of their time is devoted to quartile 2 programs, a little bit here to some programs that were deemed quartile 1, but a vast majority of their time is in quartile 3 and quartile 4. So in Chandler, they're not talking about laying off this person. It's a valuable, talented individual, but if they want to grow a program, they realize they have 65% of this individual's time to get out of certain programs and free them up to take on other services overall in the city of Chandler. Now, one thing I wanted to make mention, especially to you in this committee, I won't go into a ton of the mechanics today, but in terms of the implementation process itself, the programs go through a 2-step scoring. This is how we get to these quartiles. departments will self-assess their programs relative to the results that are established, in addition to what we call basic program attributes, things like, is the program mandated? Does it recover its costs? Does it serve the majority of your population? Is demand going up? Is demand going down? The outcome of that self-scoring assessment will then move to a peer review process where cross-departmental teams, at least this is how we've done it in other organizations, have the opportunity to ask questions about the scores that departments gave. It's not just one department handing off their programs to another. It's cross-departmental teams really scrutinizing the scores that departments gave, looking for evidence, asking questions, and the outcome of the scoring process is what determines whether a program is in quartile 4, 3, 2, 1. So no one's choosing, I'm going to put this program in quartile 1, I'm going to put this program in quartile 4. And the reason is because nobody would ever put a program in quartile 4. It's an outcome of the scoring methodology overall. I thought I should clarify that. Still in this level 2 scenario, if any of you are familiar with Michael Bloomberg's work in What Works Cities, many of the PBB communities have an overlap. They're What Works Cities communities as well. This is something that we would love to continue to talk to Kelly and Casey and Steve about, because there are grant resources there, and we've developed some good relationships. But they have incorporated this whole idea of program evaluation driven by data and resource reallocation into their certification process overall. And what this looks like over time, again, you will have a spending array. You will have your first look in the mirror. Chances are it's going to reflect that you have been prioritizing your resources. It almost always does. It's not like the grand epiphany of priority-based budgeting is that you should put money towards things that are important, whereas in the past you've been funding things that were less important. That's not the idea. But the idea is that now you can have a little bit more scrutiny on every service and their relationship to outcomes, so that over time, departments, as they make recommendations to you, can demonstrate here's how at a department level or organization-wide they're trying to free up their own resources and push them towards the new programs that you wish to start, or where they need more people or more money, that they're taking it from what they already have overall. So that's what level 2 looks like. And I think you're starting to get it. As I get here to level 3, you will start to realize priority-based budgeting is a very simple framework. You have resources tied to services scored against results, and the name of the game is to optimize what you have, pulling resources out of programs that have less to do with results overall in order to reallocate them towards the new things that are really going to drive a successful future in Salem. And it begs the question, at least for some of the level 3 communities, if you understand the evaluation criteria, that it's all based on the results that you set out with, the results that you're trying to achieve. The exciting part is that it puts it right back in front of you as policymakers. What do we really want to do? If PBB is an engine to push resources towards those results, what results do you want to achieve? This is where it gets exciting for you. Kalamazoo, Michigan. I said that out loud, and then the whole thing is exciting to you. But this is where it really gets exciting. Kalamazoo, Michigan. If you followed their story at all, 2 things are going on. One, they have some very generous donors, some philanthropic interests within the city who have donated generous amounts of money to the city. Simultaneously, over multiple years, they've been using priority-based budgeting as this tool to free up and reallocate resources. With both of those tools on the table, their council has said they're going to try to tackle a goal such as ending generational poverty. They have no idea how they're going to do it, but they want to try to accomplish that overall. What will that take? They don't want to tax the citizens to do it. They want to use the resources that they have to start new programs to really try to tackle that objective. As their city manager closed out the budget last year, City Manager Jim Ritzma, as you see here, as he's reflecting, never have I prepared a more exciting forward-looking budget than what we're presenting tonight. I've talked with Jim. He's actually going to speak at our conference this summer. And what he talks about as a public servant, and why I picked this quote, I've been doing this for 20 years, is he says, we get used to these conditions in local government where at most you might see a 5% increase here and there, or in a great year, it's something over 5%, but it's not sustained. And what that does to an organization is according to Jim, you seldom get used to talking about the big results that you could achieve, like ending generational poverty, because it doesn't feel realistic. In order to tackle a result like that, you need a lot of money to come in. And so we train ourselves not to talk like that, because how are we going to get the money to do it? And it makes total sense. But with priority-based budgeting, what he's seeing is that if we can really focus on churning through the resources we have, freeing up as much as humanly possible, and redirecting those resources towards new programs, there's real money on the table to be able to pursue some substantial goals. We have Scott County, Minnesota, using PBB to try to go after ending homelessness. All fantastic, but I made the same presentation to some council members in a suburb of Denver, Littleton, Colorado, and they said, ending generational poverty and ending homelessness, fantastic. We want to fix the potholes around here. We have some terrible streets. So it's okay. The whole point is, for whatever results are most meaningful and substantial to the city of Salem, PBB is just your engine to free up resources and push them in those directions that you'd like to go, which makes your job incredibly exciting. I can't say that enough. It's exciting time to be in local government. So we get to level 4. And if you're following along, level 1 motivation, we want to understand of the resources we have. Are they aligned with results? Can we measure that? Of course, you're going to have a stable budget. Once your budget is well known, stabilized, resources towards results and quartiles, maybe you start to get used to this resource reallocation like Boulder has been doing, where you're taking some money out of quartile 4, you're pushing it towards quartile 1. And maybe even like Kalamazoo, you start to really get ambitious and set some serious results and really start to drive resources in that direction. What will occur to you at some point along the way is that you can optimize all you wish within City Hall, within here, the city of Salem, and the resources that you have. But when you look more broadly across this community in this region, there are many other service providers, some of whom are oriented towards the results that you're in business to achieve. You have a nonprofit, you have public sector entities, even the private sector, who may provide other services similar to yours, with whom you might want to partner, and they might be trying to achieve the same results overall, and we at least want to find out, can we regionalize services? What are our options and opportunities there? So a couple examples along these lines. Here's Washington County, Wisconsin. West Bend is the county seat, and they're just outside of the Milwaukee area. So just like you will have, they have a list of all of the services they provide, the cost of those services. They've gone through PBB, and they reached out to the 4 neighboring counties outside of Washington County, and they said, are there any services that you provide that we provide, and can we talk about partnerships? Very simple conversation and very practical. It's called program matchup, and many of our communities are doing it. Washington County and one of their neighboring counties combined public health departments. So each of them offered public health, and within the public health departments were numerous services and tons of FTE. When the 2 health departments came together, you bet they identified redundant services overall. And when they eliminated the redundant services, what they ended up with was a host of FTE who now no longer needed to provide the redundant service. Instead of laying them off, they took this crop of people and they redirected them towards new services that both entities needed, but that neither entity was able to launch without raising taxes on the people. That's a perfect merger, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. And it doesn't have to be at a public health department level. We can get down to more specific services. Washington County has spun off dozens of programs overall, finding other partners in their region. City of Toledo, Ohio, they took the exact same concept, but they're working with the private sector. So in Toledo, they're partnering with their Chamber of Commerce, the chamber representing private sector interests within the city of Toledo and small businesses overall. City of Toledo is saying, look, here are all the services that we provide. Are there any that the private sector would like to partner with us on or could take off of our plate, not with the end objective of just privatizing government, but by virtue of taking responsibility off the plate of city government, the city can free up its own resources to start other programs overall. And they're finding tremendous examples. So one that's really simple, they have a city street sweeping program like most of us do. This is a high priority program overall. It's actually quartile 2, which means it has a tremendous relationship to results. It's $4.2 million in the city of Toledo, and they recognize there are other providers in that community. And if they can engage with these other entities, give them the responsibility of providing street sweeping services, still making sure that it's done at a really high level and it's a high quality job, the city can take its own people and reallocate them to a host of road improvement programs that they wish to get into overall. So it's very exciting to see the resource optimization approach taking place outside of the confines of City Hall. Here in the case of the city of Toledo, we have one other community, Clear Creek County, who did the exact same exercise, but internally. They said, before we reach out to other private sector entities, public sector, nonprofit, what if our departments simply shared their data with each other and said, are there any programs that you would like to partner on? And what's really fascinating in Clear Creek, their departments now have a mindset, if I can get a program off of my plate where it's not my department's responsibility to do this thing any longer, then I can free up my own people in order to really bolster or enhance other services that we need to get to. So it's amazing to us. I mean, we've seen many communities now where sometimes local government gets into the business of providing the services that it provides because at some point in time it had to, but now if you can recognize there are other nonprofits, other public sector, other private sector partners, perhaps we can utilize their resources as well. And it's a great objective. So we approach the future, and I'm wrapping up my presentation slides here. And for you in particular, the future is of critical importance. This is what you know most about, what you're trying to create for this community. What are the challenges that you would like to tackle if only you could free up the money and the people to tackle these challenges of your future? While water shortage might not be a problem that you have, what are the other things that it's up to local government to solve? We're working in Benicia, California, in the Bay Area of San Francisco, and they fully realize they're facing the impacts of climate change and their sea level rising issues that no other private sector company is going to get into the business of tackling. Therefore, it's upon them as local government to try to start the programs to tackle that issue, and the only way they're going to be able to do it is to reallocate what they already have to generate enough revenue to actually do that. Whether it's addressing the opioid epidemic, many of our organizations are now really trying to pour resources in that direction. Homelessness issues, more on the exciting side if you're planning for an autonomous future. I'm just showcasing all of the needs, the tremendous new needs that we need to get to. We have some communities who are tackling economic vitality and job creation, not just any new jobs, but trying to create an inclusive economy. So as you approach the future and how we're going to fund that, I submit to you that priority-based budgeting is going to be a tool in your toolbox and a very powerful engine to at least allow you to question how you might be able to reallocate what you already have. So I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I definitely wanted to give you the chance if you had questions before we have to leave this room. Some of your thoughts? Do we have a rules of order, or am I just calling on first come, first served? Okay, sounds good.
Okay, I want to break it down to a practical matter. Everything you say sounds great. What it sounds to me like is you have the buy-in and the commitment on not only the government, but the community at large to really work on things like breaking down silos. Mm-hmm. And that's a great idea. I'll give you an example of how tough it could be here in Salem. There's over 100 entities that work on the homeless and needs issue. And when it was suggested at a meeting that we held not too long ago about consolidation, the pushback was they each do something unique. They communicate together, but as far as consolidating, that was not an interest of theirs. So how do you break those silos down?
So it's a totally practical question. And there are areas where consolidation is going to make a lot of sense. And there are going to be other areas where it's very complex. So even on your partnership opportunity list, we would love for you to go through, does it make sense where you're creating a public-public or public-private partnership where everybody's still contributing to it? Does it make more sense if there is one entity taking on all of the programs that are to be provided? Does it make sense for you as the city to insource this function overall? And what are the benefits? I mean, is it worth it? Is there a better outcome for the resources that are going to go into that program overall? I would say in the example that you chose, it's illustrative of a class of sourcing discussions around a very complex issue where we go for some of the other easier wins, and that's part of the approach as well, is to say that there might be some benefit there, but maybe you don't start there. maybe you start with regional fleet services or something like that by the time you get there. I'm making that up.
And I think also the priority-based budgeting will help the city first understand funding, will help us understand the outcomes that our funding to many of those organizations is accomplishing, and that might then be data leverage to encourage cooperation, if not consolidation, in a more formal and systemic way than is currently being done.
Yeah. Agreed. Question.
Thanks. I've got a couple questions,
All right.
but I want to follow up on Councilor Lewis's question, because the partnership with, I just called them NGOs, that's not what they are here, but the same thing, and other governments, it seems to me that there's, well, let me back up and say this is very thought-provoking and good, and I can see how we kind of stumbled along through the priority-based budgeting in this budget committee cycle because, you know, we trust our city manager, we trust the city staff, this is what they recommended, and we all could see in response to a member, Paul, Tigan?
Tigan is correct.
Yes, I could be Teagan, but I thought it was Tigan. To member Tigan's question was it just last week? Yeah, last
like
Wednesday.
2 months ago, but
yeah, it
last
seems
week.
like last night. You know, he said, how are the veterans of this, how do you see this being different than before? And we all liked it for the reasons we're talking about, but I can see some potential for turf wars that Councilor Lewis mentioned. That's externally to the city, and then internally, and this is what I saw somewhat in our budget, transferring of services between departments. Often what that leads to, I think, is transferring the employees between the departments, and that's what we had in some of our budget, like this department has gone down 1.5 fiscal, employees, but because we transferred this and the same person as employee has been picked up in another department. So does it necessarily lead to actual staff reductions?
Great questions. The Washington County example, right, where you have two agencies and they come together and they went through no layoffs, but they freed up the capacity to start new programs without asking the citizens for more revenue. Those are the kind of outcomes that you're shooting for.
Yeah.
If you're trading FTE around, I think both of you have identified less than desirable outcomes when you talk about consolidation or partnership, where why would you do it? It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of value. So the objective is we're going to try to point you in the direction where there is value to identify.
Good. Now, I want to ask some questions about the quartiles.
Yeah.
This is probably stating the obvious, but it seems to me the goal is to move more items and budgeting and spending into quartile number one.
It's a framework. So the only hesitancy I'm giving you is there might be really good reason that you want to sustain
something
a
in 2 or
quartile 4.
3. Yeah,
Yep, exactly.
But the trend is to be, you want more in one than anything else. And so I noticed, I don't know what city it was from, but one of your, when you broke out their quartiles, number 2 was the biggest one.
Yeah.
And so I would presume in that situation, you would like to move some of the 2s into 1s.
Yeah, the overall trend, you're right, is forget quartiles for a second. They just represent
The most efficient and biggest bang for the buck.
biggest bang for the buck.
And that's what you want to do.
So overall, you would ask yourself, if we have the option to put more
Yeah.
towards, yep.
And then it may not be that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, but this is a service that needs to be provided, and that's why it might be in quartile 2 or quartile 3.
You got it.
Then is the goal to eliminate 4 or to get 4 as low as possible?
Yeah, the goal would be, if you are putting resources into programs that have less to do with any outcomes that you're trying to achieve, to do as little of that as you have to do. So there might be programs that are even mandated in quartile 4, but we want to do as little of them
Sure.
as you need to.
Sure.
That's right.
Then my final question, or it's more of a comment, you talked about former Mayor Bloomberg's work and stuff, and I presume you're also familiar with Chuck Moran and Strong Towns?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, and I presume that he came here and gave a presentation. He toured the city. He gave a big talk in the library that had a couple hundred people there. And so there's a lot of interest in that, not only in some of the council members, but also in the community as a whole. So I presume you are looking at some of his concepts too, and how you analyze things and look at the quartiles. You know, for example, development way out on the fringes of the city and how that affects what's happening downtown, and the fact that downtown you get more bang for your buck in taxes and everything else than you do way out on the fringe areas of the city.
All really good points. So in our work, we're going to get the basics down pat. What are the services? How much do they cost? How do they relate to these results overall? And you'll have the basic framework. Some of those in-depth policy questions around where should development take place will require, well, what do we know about the development? Does it truly lead to more money coming to the city overall, and so on?
Those are exactly the things we need to look at in development. And,
I agree.
Yeah, and so that is included. I understand it isn't, you don't drill down as much, but you understand that services in the city center might more likely be in quartile 1 than in quartile 2, 3, or 4.
I can't say at this point because it depends on, you might have a program that is offered to a limited constituency on the outskirts of town, but has everything to do with making this place safer and adding to economic vitality. That could surprise you.
I have a question back to quartiles. By definition, it's a quarter in each one of them. So how are you dividing those up? By program, by the actual number of programs, not dollars, or by budgeting, or?
It's by score. Every program ends up with a composite score where 100 would be perfect.
Okay, so it's by program though. So you're scoring on every program we've got,
Yeah.
and then they drop in by that.
Yeah, and then we apply
So
standard
one
deviation.
part program, so it's only popped up because of Councilor Anderson's question. So there's the same number of programs in every quartile?
Not necessarily.
But it's the expenditure? The amount of money expended is
That's true.
changing, looking at those graphs?
The expenditure part is right on target. So what we're looking at here is how much Boulder is investing in all of the programs in quartile 1 versus 2, 3, and 4. It's not necessarily true that each quartile has the same number of programs. When you divide by score and we apply some basic statistics like standard deviation, you will see a group of programs in quartile 4 that may or may not be equal to the number of programs in 3 or 2 or 1, but the expenditure part is what we're most interested in.
So it's, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question about the amount of resource that it takes to do the scoring and the costing. Specifically, the question of are you looking at staff time reporting for city employees and how precise it is? And as background to that briefly, with the state of Oregon, it did a comprehensive review top to bottom of all medical procedures and compared immunization all the way to emergency surgeries. And it just said, we ran out of money at this point, and that's where we stop providing the service. When you have the amount of overhead in reporting and measuring, at some point the pendulum swings and people say, stop measuring and get doing. and for somebody who has been through that. And so you say, is it 3% overhead that's involved in staffing and reporting? Are you reporting like attorneys do? You're getting down to the 5-minute increments. So that's my question is, how much overhead, and is there time reporting for employees, or is it surveying work that does that costing?
It's an awesome question, and where you're coming from, we will stress accuracy over precision throughout this exercise. So when it comes to costing, for example, staff will go through an exercise where they're saying, I have 100% of Chris Fabian's time, where does it go? What programs do I devote my time to? And at first we'll stress things like, plus or minus 5% is accurate. We don't need to get down to a time and motion study to track every second that every person spends on every program. To your point, there's no added benefit by increasing precision. It's priority-based budgeting, It's not priority-based time tracking, and these are the kind of things that we'll try to emphasize to everybody as they go through the work. I want to know, can I take this person who spends, am I surprised that they spend 15% of their time on a particular program where I don't want them to spend any time on it? I don't care if it's 14% or 16%. It's an order of magnitude discussion at that point. Is that helpful?
And as the city gets into this more, it'd just be nice to know what is the overhead of costing, and to be aware of kind of the expectations. How much is it putting into it now? How much would it be putting into it to have more accurate information about how much it costs to deliver a given service?
Totally true. Priority-based budgeting will be a program, it often is, that gets scored in the process for full transparency.
Hopefully it's quartile.
And we won't rig it. Very good. Well,
Are we done? We're past 1 o'clock, but I don't know. So anyway, I was going to just ask, you mentioned measuring to results several times, but how are you, is it part of the priority-based budgeting that you're actually measuring the results, or are you using our basic survey data, or which results are you talking about?
great question. So in the methodology, the departments will identify their inventory of services provided, and they get a scorecard to communicate their opinion on the influence of programs on your results as stated. So if I offer something to do with the homeless shelter program, whatever the program is, and I'm going to communicate to you, does this make our community safer? Does it impact economic vitality? On and on, related to your results overall. Now that's just my opinion at that point. And now in peer review process, the cross-departmental teams will push back and say, I'm not sure why you scored your program so highly towards this result. What evidence do we have to back it up? And I'll tell you, in the first year, you are unlikely to have perfect data. So the point of priority-based budgeting will push the organization to say, maybe we don't track this information today, but for next year, if the department's going to keep that sort of score, we should start to measure this information. So the evidence starts to grow. And we have some communities kind of in the evolutionary chart who start to gather metrics. But back to Mr. Bassett's point, there is a limit to what you want to measure. And in scoring, it's going to be what are the measurements, the metrics that indicate that the program really does have causal effect on the results you're trying to achieve.
And that imperfection may very well result in us coming back to council, going to council's advisory boards and commissions for guidance on those measures. So it's not a completely insular perspective, a staff perspective on the measures, or excuse me, on the results that we're trying to achieve in the measures of those results.
Is there a thought from the city staff in using the annual city survey, the one that goes out, is that November or December, aligning that with this project as well?
Certainly. This really, it will be a tool to help us with that cycle of planning, implementation, and evaluation. And the annual survey will be one way. We may need more robust tools to add to our measuring of those results.
Good.
Peer review is only employed, and I think that insular comment's interesting to me, that it's only peer review because, whether you talk a silo effect or not, it's jobs, and it just seems like, would there be any outside sort of neutral folks in there doing that, involved in the peer review?
We can. So we've had in San Jose, California, they invited some of their bargaining units and participants to the table, and they also had community liaisons who hosted neighborhood meetings, participate on behalf of citizens. We will give some advice, and at least a spectrum of how different communities have organized their peer review teams, if that's something of interest. They're all a little different. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, everybody, thank you. I know we're kind of tight on time. This won't be the last you see me or our team, but we really appreciate the chance to work with you. This is a company that I've founded, and priority-based budgeting has been central to my work for many, many years. So we're thankful for you choosing to work with us, and really are excited about delivering some significant value to the city. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time.
Chris and his team are staying after, so if you do have some more questions, want some one-on-one time, please. We're here to help share information, so we go into this fully informed.